I'm Peter Verhash. I've recorded already two videos about Jamal. One is about what is Jamal generally, what it can be used for, and the other one is how to install it into IntelliJ, which is the easiest way to use Jamal. Then I was thinking about that I will create other videos that will go through all the features of Jamal. But then I realized that this will be a little bit dry and will get cut a month doing all the details. There will be such a thread, but I believe that it's much easier and much more fun if I create some videos that show you what you can really do with Jamal in practice. And this has the disadvantage that I will show you something that you may not fully understand, but I will talk about the features of Jamal and you may get the taste and you may get a motivation to leverage it and to see what it can really do. So recently I was looking at JUnit Pioneer and I was looking at the readme file, which is Markdown. And maybe if you look at on GitHub on JUnit Pioneer, you may see that it's Markdown, or in the future they may accept my suggestion, which I will make, creating a fork and a pull request to use ASCII-Doc even on the readme file with Jamal flavors. And the very first thing that I realized that if you look at the screen here, and this is the readme, and let's just close everything else so that here the original file, this version here, was not there. In the Markdown file, let's just use git and restore the Markdown. So there was a readme Markdown, then let's create the readme Markdown and then restore it. Just okay, so what you can see here, this is the original readme Markdown, that it just says, oh, whatever version it is. That this is on the right side of the screen. You can see that it's very small, but I can zoom into it while I'm editing the video. So here you can see that they don't put the version there, and it can be done using Jamal very easily. So I was just thinking that, okay, what's easier? I just fetch it from the POM file, and in the POM file there is the release, but then I realized they are not using Maven, they are using Gradle. Okay, but it's still the version 1.7.1, which is the current version, as you can see on the screen here, should be somewhere in the source. Let's have a find. Let's find it where it is, and then it's nowhere else than in the readme addoc. Yeah, of course it's there, but this readme addoc is created from the readme addoc.jam, which I've already created, and it's using this version macro. And if this is the only place where this version is, it means that the version is not maintained in the source directory, in the source code. But then where is it? What I realized was that it was in the Gradle build file, and it was taken with this fetch here. So actually Gradle is taking the release version of the project from the git release, from the git tag. And this is a very interesting thing, but how can I get it in Jamal? Well, I can execute an external git command and get the same command, but then the Jamal file will not be portable, because in Jamal you can execute an external command only if you configure that external command on your installation. So you just download the Jamal file, it will not execute and some arbitrary executable. You have to edit and assign a symbolic name to an executable, and when you are using the ioexec macro which executes an external command, then you will have to reference the symbolic name. It's a security feature, but it means that if I try to use exactly the same command, then it will not be portable. It will not run on a system where Git is not configured to be executable from within Jamal. The other thing that I can do is a little bit Git specific, but after all, it's Git. So that if I look at the .git packed refs file, this here, then actually I can see the text there. So let's have a look at the terminal, and I'm in the JUnit Pioneer directory, development directory that I cloned. And if I list the content of this file, then I can see that this is the content, and let me enlarge it, but you can see it. I have a lot of lines here which define, and the last one here that I highlight contains the reference. How can I fetch it using Jamal? Well, you already see here the final solution, but let's replace it line by line. So the very first thing is that I have to include this file. And then you can see it appears on the right side, it's immediately there. So I could include this file. The verbatim option between the brackets says that when it's included, it doesn't need to be evaluated before it gets included. It's not a Jamal file, it's a plain text file. So as it is, it will be inserted there. The options usually are between opening and closing parentheses, but for the for the core built-in macros, which are integral part of Jamal, these are between brackets. So this is a little bit distinguishing the core macros and external library macros. Okay, we have it there, but this is still far from being usable. What should I do? Well, what I need actually is a define, which defines version to be the version which is on the last line. So somehow I should just delete all the lines except the last one, or I can just say that, okay, that every line that has this refs tag v and then something, I should replace it with a define. And if, because it's the last line which contains the version that I'm interested in, as all the defines are executed one after the other, and I'm not using any modifier on the define, because I can say the define only if it was not defined, or throw an error if it was already defined. But if I don't say anything else, then define will silently redefine a user-defined macro. So what I will do is that I replace all the lines and I will tell you why I'm using this hash mark. And then I will just say that replace. What do I want to replace? Well, actually this one. This is a regular expression. as you can see, I replace it with nothing at this moment, so every line which matches this regular expression will be just empty line now. But what I want is a define, and for this reason I have this capturing group, and what I need is a define and this is what I want it replaced with. Okay, and nothing happens. Why? Because I want to use the lines which are included, and I want replace line to work on the lines. Therefore, I want the include to be executed before I execute replace lines. And the built-in macros are preceded with the @ sign, like in the case of include, or with the hash mark. If it's preceded with the @ sign, then the content, which is following the name of the macro until the end of the macro, is given to the macro, and the macro will work on it. Built-in macros are written in Java. They get it as a parameter in the evaluate method. However, if I use hash mark, then Jamal first evaluates the content of the macro, that's here, which I highlighted, so following the name of the macro until the macro closing, and in that case for replace lines, this is the second macro closing string here. During this evaluation, it will evaluate include, but it will also evaluate version equals $1. So if I use here version, then probably I didn't try it, so maybe it's not right, and it's a complex thing, I understand, but version I suspect is going to be here $1. No, it's not defined. And why it's not defined? Because it's inside replace line. But if I export version there, just yes, then here you can see it's here. The value of version is $1, and this is not what I wanted. Well, actually I have to export version here to get this $1, because the define is inside a block, and every user-defined macro has a scope, and it's valid within the block it is defined. And if it was defined outside of the block, then inside the block it's overridden, or if it was not defined, then it's valid only inside the block, and outside the block it's not visible anymore. But if I export a user-defined macro, then it will go one level up out of the scope, and in this case the scope is the scope of the macro, the replace lines. Therefore it's exported. Now what I need actually is to replace the lines not to something which is an empty string, because it's already evaluated. And what I can do is to use a built-in macro, a core built-in macro, which is ident. And I'm using with the @ sign here. And in this case, when the lines are evaluated before evaluating the replace lines macro, which I highlighted, when ident as a macro is evaluated, it uses the @ sign, so the define is not evaluated before ident is invoked. Ident will get the string, as you can see here, highlighted. And also I have to use a proper closing, so that there is no syntax error. Still, we have some syntax error, but I will look at that soon. And then ident is just returning its content without any change. And then it's not evaluated any further. So replace lines will see its option replace, and it will replace to define line. Let's have a look at what the problem is. Yeah, it's not defined right now because if we look at, then we still have some other things. Of course, we don't have it. So just, and then we can see what is happening. It really replaces the versions with a lot of defines. The only problem is that right now this define is not executed. And what I want it to be executed so that it defines the version. What I can do is that I can say that, well, I can evaluate this code which is here. So I can say that I want to evaluate, and then I may have here again version, which I do, and it's great. But the only problem is that I have a lot of garbage here, and I do not want to have this garbage. Why do I need this garbage? I don't want to have this. How can I get rid of that? Oh, and yeah, also because evaluate is also something that eval is very often. There is a shorthand for that. And if I write here an exclamation mark, then it's the same as if I write an eval macro around the whole replace lines macro. Okay, what I need is to treat this whole block as a kind of macro definition, and everything else which is a pure text is not interesting. So what I want is a block. So I can start a new scope with a block, and again just it's a core macro. See that I'm using again the hash mark so that the content is evaluated before the block is evaluated. And the block macro does a very simple thing. It just evaluates the content and then returns an empty string. So nothing here. I got rid, but version is not defined. Why? Because again I was putting a scope around the block scope, around the definition. So I again here I have to export and I think we actually got to the point where we were almost. Yes? Yes, exactly. It's the same. Except I have here this extra version. So here we are. So we developed a macro which automatically will fetch into the documentation the version from the git tag of the current tag, because in this project it's used as the version. It's not, it's debatable whether it's okay or not, but that's what's happening. And we created, and it automatically, whenever you edit the file or you run your build, if you include the conversion from jump to adhoc, automatically you will generate an up-to-date ASCII doc file including the release version. And if I use this version macro here, then I just get here this one 1.7.1 in the current situation, in the current version, and not just like what the original says, that version, well, whatever the version is, you know, look it up somewhere. No, I don't want to look it up. The documentation should hand me it on a silver plate. It's here. And Jamal can do that for you. I know it was a fairly complex example, but it was shedding some light on how very complex things you can do with Jamal. I understand if you got lost in the middle. I tried to explain things, but of course I know Jamal very well. I created it, so I may missed some point. It may have been difficult to follow everything. I will create the other videos which go step by step through all the macros and with all the concepts that you may use inside Jamal.